All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Team Coaching Zone podcast and to this week's Team Coaching Learning Session. We have a great global group on today from Tattva Consulting. Hemant, Maya, Inba, and Melissa, also from the Team Coaching Zone. Great to see everybody. How is everyone today?
Doing good, Krista. Hi.
Yes, welcome indeed. Happy Friday indeed. We were just having a nice warm-up conversation, and I was thankful that it was time to start the show because I think we were getting into some juicy topics about ChatGPT, trust, and a recent report that Inba surfaced on team effectiveness. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. But we have a nice global group here. I think we have people in India, in Romania, and Ireland. I'm calling in from Anchorage, Alaska today, visiting my family out here. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about these learning conversations. We can really span the globe and, get into the pulse of what's happening in these different locales around the world. But Melissa, how are you? It's as my co-host, anything you want to say here at the outset before we get to know our guests today and get this going?
No, I'm just really looking forward to today's conversation, how it emerges, where it takes us, and it's my last thing to do before the weekend kicks in. So what a way to end the weekend. Very nice indeed.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's make it a good way to wrap up the week for those of you that are easing into your weekends. But Hemant, why don't we start with you? I think you are the person behind Tattva Consulting, and we could get to know you a little bit. And I always like to ask about the name of the organization, and I think there's an interesting origin story there to the name. So why don't we start with you and Tattva, and then we can learn about your colleagues Maya and Inba.
Sure. Thank you, Krista, for having me here and having all of us as a part of this fantastic initiative that you've had on for a while now. And I know you've had very diverse groups from different backgrounds come in and different places and markets and countries come in and have conversations. So it's a privilege to be here. Thank you. As far as the name is concerned, and this goes almost 5-6 years back when I turned into consulting after my organizational roles in HR and talent development and so forth. I think one of the things that fundamentally I believed in that organizations, as the name suggests, are organic. And what in the name that we keep for the firm can capture that essence in the first place. And Tattva by nature, it means the essence or the 5 elements. And the belief was that like nature has elements, organizations have elements, our body has elements. In fact, some of our very old Indian sciences around biology talk about elements in the body and so forth. And for the nature, for our body to work efficiently, these elements need to be in balance. And similarly, for organizations to work efficiently, the elements of the organization need to be in a certain balance to be effective. Now, these elements could be structure, these elements could be teams, for example, and the way teams are operating that we spoke of. These could be leadership, these could be processes, etc., etc. And the whole idea of Tattva was to balance these elements and help organizations balance these elements, and therefore the idea of Tattva Consulting. So that's a quick background to how it came into being. Yeah.
That's great. And just one follow-up. So what in a nutshell are you mainly focusing on? I think there may be multiple lines of business, it sounds like you're working in.
So our primary areas are 3-pronged. We work in the area of organization development, which is large-scale change and transformation, helping organizations go through that from an HR and a people process standpoint. That's one part of what we do. The second piece is around talent management for existing organizations, ramping up their talent processes and making them more effective. And the third is around capability development, both at leader level and at a team level. So those are broad areas that we operate in.
Yeah. Okay. And the scope of your work is global or more regional?
So Maya is right here, and we work with Maya's organization with people across the globe, I think, right from Australia to US to Mexico to Germany to Austria, I mean, various parts of the world. So we do work primarily in India, but a lot of work we've done in Southeast Asia. We worked in China and, of course, across the globe for some time now.
Yeah. Great. Well, why don't we go over to you then, Maya, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Krista. And thank you, Hemant. Actually, this is how we got to know each other a bit better and work together through our global partnerships. About me, well, I am currently at UIPath. I've been with the company for about 5 years. But besides this, what you need to know about me is that I'm passionate about really helping people grow and about fostering that autonomy. This is something that when I wake up, I think, through what I do, how can I help these people become autonomous in their development journey? Because, they get these transferable skills. And when people understand a bit better about themselves, understand where they want to go, how they want to get there, the discussions are fairly easily, right? And they take this and they can put in other areas of their life. And besides this, well, I'm a talent and learning professional for about 13 years now. I've been in different backgrounds, right? I started in an NGO, and I was lucky enough to have the chance to explore there where my passion lies. And then I continued in consultancy, and then I was with the international company. And then, as I mentioned, in the last 5 years, I joined UiPath. I was the first learning and talent person. Now I'm leading the team, and I also grew with the company because Hemant probably remembers about 5 years ago, we were 400 people, and now we're over 5,000 in over 50 countries. So that's been quite a journey.
That's amazing. And Imba, let's move over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Krista. So primarily, my background is in human resources, did my post-graduation. And then for the next 28 years, I traversed through very many organizations in different domains of HR and concluded my 28-year corporate career with Hewlett-Packard as their global director for learning and development for one of the global delivery verticals with an international team reporting into me. I started, me and my wife, we started this practice 14 years back. We have 6 areas of practice. 5 areas are headed by me, which is organization development, team effectiveness, leadership development, executive coaching, and employee relations. And my wife, who is a counselor and a psychotherapist, she heads the employee well-being vertical of the practice. And we felt that these 6 areas combine the 360 degrees of the people side of the organization. So we named it very simply People Dimensions at Work, because we were focusing mostly on work-related stuff. And that's how the name came about. Nothing esoteric, but very, very practical, application-oriented. And it's been now 14 years since we have been doing. I have had one long association with a American-based organization headed by a person of Indian origin who is a US national. And as part of that, in January 2020, I visited Bay Area in California to conduct their 3-day business leadership retreat. And post that, there have been a couple of coaching assignments, but most of my work happens with Indian organizations.
Okay. Excellent. Well, this is great backdrop. I think I'm going to stick with you, Imba, but let's bring everybody in. Just before we were getting on, we were getting a bit warmed up. Imba, you were mentioning a CIPD paper on team effectiveness, and then you mentioned that you punched into ChatGPT about team effectiveness, and then Hemant, you were starting to bring in the McChrystal book on Team of Teams. And Maya, you were sharing a bit about some of the leadership development programs that you're working on around psychological safety and others. So why don't we kind of pick back up there and refresh where we were going, and then just see where the energy takes us. But Imba, do you want to go back to what you had discovered in the CIPD paper as well as your ChatGPT query?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things is, before I dive into that, with your permission, one of the key struggles that I have seen while working with teams, especially business leadership teams or functional leadership teams, is the level of trust that exists in the team, both cognitively and effectively. And everything, when you do a deeper diagnosis, points to the lack of that element that impacts all other areas. Some people talk of 5 areas, some people talk of 7 areas, but they're all interconnected. So I've been constantly trying to find out how this whole concept of trust, especially in a team environment which has diversity, which has diversity of every kind, how do you build that kind of trust? So I came across yesterday evidence-based review, which is a very, very comprehensive paper that has been published by CIPD. I will see if I can put the link, send the link across. And it talks about actually they having done a lot of study with teams, and it talks about 6 areas of that needs to be focused by any person who is leading a team or who is part of a team, right? But if you go back to our basic things, so things like team dynamics, cohesion, shared thinking, information sharing, reflection, well-planned interventions, right? They all come down to the, in some way get connected to Patrick Lencioni's those 5 elements of a high performance team or an effective team. He, of course, calls it dysfunction, but I have, kind of morphed it as essential functions rather than dysfunctions. And working with that model has given a lot of things. So then I said, okay, this whole aspect of trust, both at a cognitive level and at an affective level, is something which is very, very, kind of ambiguous. What may be trust to you may not mean trust to me. So what I did was, thanks to AI, I just fed in a query into ChatGPT and asked it, how do team members develop trust within a team? And it listed out about 10 interventions that can be undertaken by individuals in the team and by team as a collective to enhance this thing. And again, when you look at those 10 items, they all again tie back in some manner to those 5 areas that Patrick Lencioni has talked about. So constantly I see that, if for me at least, Patrick Lencioni's that framework seems pretty robust, and we can use it depending upon where the team is. And that is the diagnostic part, where the team is from a 0 to 10, where it is in the area of team effectiveness.
Well, interesting stuff. It's interesting. I never thought that ChatGPT would become competition as a team coach for team coaches, but maybe that is the case. But maybe ChatGPT also read the article by CIPD, right? So, what kind of information is it scanning? I see.
I noticed I noticed the EMCC conference is on in, I think it's Prague at the moment, over the couple of days, and the president of the EMCC dropped into ChatGPT, how should I open this coaching conference, and kind of shared that it was a pretty good starting point that enabled him to tweak and kind of make his own. So I suspect we're going to see that more and more, where the use of ChatGPT and other AI tools starts to be more used and useful. And I believe as well that there's some research starting in that whole area as to, how will these two worlds interconnect, the world of teams, organizational development, coaching, interconnect with AI. So I guess it's a whole new world.
It is, Melissa.
Go
Sorry?
ahead, Maya.
Just to build a bit, I recently came across a newsletter that teaches you how to use effectively ChatGPT. What are the type of questions you should ask so that ChatGPT, answers you depending on your very specific needs. And it is like super famous. It was launched in March or something, and it grew so much. It has so many users, and I was so impressed to see the difference it makes in, one or two verbs and how you follow up on this. So that's a new skill we need to learn nowadays, right? If we need to get quick the information and what we want to get out of it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So they call it prompting, finding the right prompt to put in. And so not only articles, there are trainings that are happening in the last 2 months, I've noticed, on filling in the right prompts to get the right information at that. So it's an incredible pace at which information has shifted in the last few months as we saw it. And obviously has impact for organizations and teams as we speak about it.
No, for example, in my case, if I had to get those 10 areas, I would have had to, in my earlier I would have had to, get into searching the Google, looking up at different articles. All that is taken care of by ChatGPT by putting that one effective prompt. And that is where I find that, ChatGPT, at least in the kind of practice I'm doing, it is helping me a lot in my coaching, in my team coaching, individual coaching, the prompts.
That's great.
And some of my,
augmenting your coaching with
absolutely.
AI. It's just the beginning. But, back to the issue of trust, I think about that, I do think it links down obviously to these basic human needs of being around psychological safety, being, remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But I also think it's an interesting, is it a cause and an effect at the same time? In other words, I think the reason why trust is such an issue in a lot of teams is it's just a natural thing, because as human beings, we are social species. We need to feel safe and, in order to thrive and function. I also, though, think it speaks a little bit to the current state of how teams may not be formed well. A lot of times we put people together in an org chart, a new leader takes over, the team is functioning. They may not have been. Now, I just with a team of 50 people earlier this week, that trust was one of the top 4 issues that came up in a retrospective over the last, 6 weeks. But they've never met in person. How do you form trust into 50 people without really a good launch or a good formation, right? So I think it's interesting, like, when is it a cause and when is it a symptom? And I do think this is about, hopefully, as we shift more and more from individual-centric to more team-centric, and now it sounds like AI also enabled work environments, that maybe we will kind of get the message that we need to really pay attention, especially to the beginnings, right? Beginning, middles, and ends in the life cycles of teams are critical. I don't know what you guys think about that. Because I feel like every team I've ever worked with, trust, communication, lack of roles and responsibilities, clear roles and responsibilities, those are just kind of like almost every team says that that's what they're lacking. And my big question is why? And whose responsibility is it to try to help the team put in place those conditions or factors?
So it's interesting as I hear that, Krista. We were working with some senior leadership teams over the last few months, and we realized one particular thing. We had assessed the organization, so we went through their whole performance management process and figured out what are some of the areas that need to be worked upon. We went through the whole process of how the organization gets feedback from the market. We figured that piece out and we shared that with the organization. One thing, when we asked them, so how does the senior leadership team get feedback about how they are operating? And I had to repeat the question.
Imagine the response.
Twice or thrice, I had to repeat the question for somebody to comprehend the question. Yeah. And then the counter question was, what do you mean? And then, of course, I spoke about, and I came back to the 6 team conditions, by the way. I leveraged that. There is some fantastic work, of course, that Ruth has done, you have done, Melissa has done over a period of time in this area. And we went back to the fundamentals. We went back to the purpose of the team. We went back to the structure of the team. And we really asked them, so what is the mechanism that you have to give yourself feedback on the way you are operating? And I understood. And in some ways, it was a rhetorical question. And then we got into a longer discussion of creating mechanisms to be able to do that. And from there come the symptoms of, lack of trust and so on and so forth. So when those symptoms show, in my mind, is when we need to somewhere go deeper to figure out what's not working well. So that's just, I'll pause here. I mean, there are more things we can talk about on this, but love to hear others' comments and opinions on this.
I sense there that that's what individual members on the team are able to describe as their lived experience, right? They're able to put a feeling or attribute how they're experiencing being a part of the team. So whilst they might be describing it to us as, we need to have trust on the team, there's never that kind of collective conversation as you're describing around, well, why might that be? But more importantly, why is that so important in service of what it is the team is trying to achieve and do, right? So I can see why, team members describe the experience of what they're experiencing as opposed to the root causes.
The root cause
of
it.
Yeah.
Well said.
I think it's the iceberg really model, because I think that's what people see and feel, right? And it's important. And it also, if it's not addressed, it will become a major obstacle to any further acceleration and advancement. And it's insufficient just to address the tip of the iceberg, right? Alone.
Of the iceberg.
Yeah. Maya, were you going to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to build a bit, because one component of trust, of course, there are different models, different researchers out there, but it's also this authenticity, how you take me for who I am, how you include me in this team, how you as a colleague, as a leader, accept me at the end of the day is the question. And we've been actually doing a bit of work in this direction, because authenticity is like really hard to see. I'm authentic and I can show up for who I am, and I'm cherished and I'm welcome. And I think there's this great research from Francis Frey saying that the first level is actually for people to feel safe. And after they feel safe, then they can build on this, and then you have, they feel cherished. And when we talk about trust, especially in pandemic, right? On one hand, it's the leader's responsibility. At least this is what we try to make it as a principle, right? With our help to foster this, right, as an underlying team, so that we can build upon. At the same time, what we noticed, especially among people who really want to come to work and they have this very powerful vision of changing the world, is the mission and the vision that rallies us around this, right? So when this very top vision, mission, and how we're really transforming the world and what motivates us to get up and do something very unique, and at the very bottom, how we are, with each other, and how that safety is among us, so that we can openly talk about what are the ways of working, not just facilitating a conversation. Let's be better as team workers. And then we just say some things for the sake of, HR or an external facilitator got us into that discussion, but we are really vulnerable and we talk about what's going on. These are kind of the two very at the top and at the bottom perspective that
I love that.
Yeah, a lot of work on.
That makes a lot of sense.
Very good.
I want to add, actually, I want to pick on Kirsta, what you said about, are they the symptoms or are they a deeper question? So one of the things that I have tried to find out in my diagnostics is, where, first of all, I make a clear distinction between a group and a team. And a group does not necessarily, just like you mentioned, Krista, an organization putting a set of people, bringing them together and saying, hey, this is what is your mandate, right, does not convert them into a team, right? So the group and the team, the differentiation between group and team is very important for them to begin the understanding with, number one. Number two, most of the time when interventions start happening is at a time when the team is actually hitting, or if I may call, the group is actually hitting some real problems and they are stuck, they are not able to move forward. And that's where, the very age-old Bruce Tuckman's 4 stages of team development actually helps you understand where the team is actually stuck with. And many of the teams that I have worked with in the past, they are either in the storming phase or they have exhausted the storming phase and they are just resigned to kind of doing whatever each one is expected to do. Now, when we bring those diagnostic elements to the team and ask them what is happening in this team, the other aspects begin to surface. And that's been one of the experiences that I've been drawing heavily upon to work with teams and, telling their stories and those kind of stuff, and which has opened up a lot of people. For example, the work that I did with this US-based team, right? One of the individuals in the team was someone who was there from day one the organization was set up. And in his story, he mentioned a few things which 4 of the members who were part of the team right from that time, including the CEO, was not aware of at all. And when he shared that, you could see a shift in the 4 people's understanding of what motivates him. So much so, the CEO actually said, I understand now why you do certain things in a certain manner.
Right. No, that's power. Yeah, the power of storytelling and narrative. Yeah. I wanted to. Go ahead, Hemant. What were you going to say?
I was just thinking of Inba's conversation on the Tuckman stages. We do some work with psychodrama, and we were working with this group. And while we were learning group dynamics, we were practicing it also because it was a new group at the same point of time. So we were in a lab of sorts where we were looking at processes and so forth. And we realized that the rate at which the group was evolving, and it would be reflected on the rate at which teams and organizations and markets evolve, the process of norming and storming, or storming and norming rather, is constant, it's rapid, and the cycles of that happening have grown shorter than what they used to be at a point in time. And therefore, when we talk about the dynamism, the awareness of the fact that any shift in the market, we were talking about ChatGPT some time back, which is in some ways rattled the world with the kind of news items and reports that you read. So how do you deal with that shift when that happens so quickly? So that was one thought that crossed my mind, the shorter cycles of norming and storming, or storming and norming rather. That's one. Second piece that came to my mind when Maya was talking about organizations doing their vision, and then coming to the team, and then somebody in the group saying, okay, so we expect it to be here, and therefore doing what is required. In my experience, I've also noticed that while people become clear of the organization's vision and mission and purpose, larger purpose, but the purpose of the team, why it exists, is not very clear. And a lot of times this purpose is very different from that purpose. And bringing that to fore in itself is a significant intervention for teams.
This is the purpose I was talking about, Hemant, the purpose of that team.
Of that team, particularly being there. And in fact, in 6 team conditions, we talk about that as one of the essential elements for organizations and teams to succeed, is to have a purpose for the team per se. So
interesting.
Do you have a sense that that's as a consequence of we have focused very heavily in organizations on, competencies and what are the competencies needed for certain roles, and they tend to be a lot of individual competencies or leader competencies, and then just this big bucket is made of and teamwork as a competency. But we haven't really given leaders or managers the training or the know-how around this big bucket that we call teamwork. It's almost just kind of lobbed into
one of those things.
And we pay more attention to things like developing communication skills or developing strategic thinking, and we just kind of leave teamwork as an assumption that people are going to be able to make it happen.
We actually, Melissa, have this at least for our emerging and first line leaders. This is one of the topics we always start with, because we realize how much pressure might be on these people who have never done it and they have no idea. There is a lot. So that's
and I've noticed at UIPath, Maya, I mean, you guys are doing an incredible job, given the fact that a lot of teams are spread across geographically. So you may have somebody who's heading marketing sitting in one country, say Singapore, but managing a team in Australia, in China, in Vietnam, etc., and therefore the ability now of the team to come together in this virtual context. So I've seen that firsthand, and it's not easy to try and create that synergy for the team. So
it was by design, Hemant, actually, because about half of our organization, we have international organizations and we have global organizations. We like to say we are a global organization because about half of our colleagues are part of global teams.
Right.
So it was a bit by design.
Incredible.
I want to pick up something you said earlier, Inba. We were talking a little bit about training and the impact of training. And I think I heard you say that at this point, you don't do training workshops or programs anymore. I thought that was really intriguing. Could we pick that up a little bit? I think that could be an interesting line to continue building here.
I said that more in the context of leadership development. So in my experience, I've seen Melissa was talking of competencies, and every organization, you name it, they have a list of what they call as leadership competencies. Some may have 7, some may have 12, some may have 14. I have come across an organization that gave me a list of 26 leadership competencies.
Wow.
Right? Now, even the work that I did with the organization, which had spelled out only 7 leadership competencies, I checked up in the opening thing. I said, okay, let's do a very simple exercise. Let us take one competency, and you please write down what does it signify to you, or what is the meaning that you are making of that competency. And you won't believe me, Krista, that there were 7 different ways that competency was understood. So the question that logically comes is that word, which is very generic in nature, is it meaning the same to every individual in every organization? Now, for example, someone coming from a very highly, performance-oriented kind of a company in those days, if we were to talk of, let's say, Jack Welch's GE, right? And the person is coming from GE, let us say, into a Unilever kind of a organization. Is the leadership competency on a particular thing talked about by GE, is it going to mean the same in Unilever? So where is the socialization of the competency in a manner that can be understood and imbibed by that person? A person is coming with 15 years of, let us say, experience in 2 or 3 or 4 different companies. The person comes to your company, and then you tell him or her that this is a competency. Are you educating that person or not? So for me, training is about skills. So if there are some leadership skills that need to be imparted, yes, please do, training. But when you talk of leadership development, it is going beyond the realm of skills. And that is why I told you, Krista, I don't do training programs. I do workshops. So you say that, okay, this is my 18 operational level leaders. I want to ensure that, their leadership goes up, at least 1 notch above. And so, do it more like a workshop rather than a skill building program. Over to you, Krista.
I love that. I know you said over to Krista, but I'm going to grab that because I love that. Because what you're touching on for me there is the whole idea of the idiosyncrasies, the idiosyncratic nature of competencies, and then we double down on that in organizations, and then we say, and now you are going to evaluate people around these competencies, yet we all have different understandings of what the competencies actually mean. There's a really brilliant article, I'll stick it in, by Marcus Buckingham around the feedback fallacy and how we think that we are designed to be able to evaluate others around competency, and we're just simply not. So if we were engaging in better conversations, which it sounds like what you're trying to do through your workshops, Imba, then we would have a better chance of, being able to move the dial, whether it be around performance, team well-being, or whatever it is we're trying to do. So I love that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And also we had competencies, many, even for each level, right? And then we realized this is so complex. This is so complex. We tried to do something good, but we overcomplicate it. And what we realized was actually that we were missing some leadership principles, because yes, then you can go deep with certain competencies that are very specific and you need to evaluate, to understand, and then to develop. But when we talk about leadership globally, right? What does it mean to be a leader in our organization? As you mentioned, Imba, right? I come from another organization, other principles, other competencies, other ways of working. But here, and we started doing this work, I think about 1 year ago. We are almost done. We're going to announce it. And then we're looking at this phase of integrated from onboarding and all the people practices, right, to exit. So that people, it's not just we tell about them, but they also see, okay, how is this reflected on my performance? How is this reflected on my development? How is this reflected on XYZ? So it's already embedded into people's reality, but first talk about them, right? We need to make sure people understand what we mean by our leadership principles.
I'm Krista, with your permission, I'm going to
jump in.
a kind of a statement that can be like a red herring. Is organizations are too minutely focused on work outcomes and not focused on the people who are actually bringing the outcomes. The thing that I'm trying to speak to organizations with which I'm working is, can the organization at an organization level be focused on the people to enable them, to facilitate them, and then throwing my hat in and saying that you can be rest assured that the outcomes will be taken care by the people.
Yeah.
That shift.
So that's the learning and performance orientation, right? That by actually developing a learning orientation, you as a byproduct perform better than if you try to perform better. Right. Yeah. So what other topics, the other one we were kind of getting into, Hemant, you're very animated around the Team of Teams book by McChrystal. And I had one of the co-authors, David Silverman, of that book on the podcast many years ago. But I'm curious, what is it about that book? I think for many of us, the Team of Teams is the holy grail in the team coaching area that we want to get to. It's beyond just working with one team, but with nested systems of teams. But I'm curious, what was it in that book that was really getting you excited?
Sure. So the idea of teams and a lot of inspiration coming from the defense forces, from the military, has been around obviously for a while. What I found unique about the Team of Teams book is how the orientation to today's market environment is mapped to what happens in a war theater. And of course, with a lot of his experience in the field and so forth, he talks about how a team of SEALs or a Navy SEALs or a crack unit can come together to make things happen. They don't have PowerPoints, they don't make presentations, they don't have long conversations. They have few minutes, a few seconds at times, which can make a difference to their living or not living. And there he spoke about the idea of shared consciousness, where the level of team's ability to connect and interact with each other reaches a point that they're operating like a shared consciousness. And that idea I like, and that's a great outcome to have for a team, where in terms of the communication that is happening, in terms of the decision making that is happening, in terms of whatever they're choosing to do, course of action they're taking, their goals, their context, there is a common understanding that is created almost intuitively. And the foundation of that, I think we were alluding to some time back, whether we spoke about trust or some of the other elements that come in that lead to that shared consciousness of the team. And that'll be so beautiful if teams, senior leadership teams, can collectively operate like that crack unit. I mean, they may have more than 2 minutes, obviously, but the process can be similar, and that I found beautiful about the book.
If I
interestingly
add,
about
Krista,
that, just one quick comment. Oh yeah, you go, Imba, go. Yeah.
No, Krista, you go. I'll go after you.
I was just going to say, I think the interesting thing about the Navy SEALs is to get to that level of shared consciousness. They're some of the most, they spend the most training time together at any teams in the world. So it's 10,000 hours or something to that effect, if I remember, of practice where they can read each other. And that's just like great sports teams, right? It's the practicing on the field makes them operate in a flow state. They get into flow quickly, right? And they can read each other. And so it's interesting. And, we work with a lot of leadership teams, as I imagine many of you do. And leadership teams don't spend a lot of time together. And then when they do come together, they tend to be very large groups. They're not safe with each other. So it's interesting. And then you see that showing up, the lack of practice, the lack of time together does impact the ability to get into a flow state, if at all.
Beautiful.
But,
Imba, sorry, just 1 second. You spoke about sports a moment ago, Krista, and I enjoy soccer as a sport, and it only gets better every year as I see the league matches, I see the World Cup and so forth. A lot of times you notice in soccer that the center forward, when he's passing the ball, he's not passing the ball to the right forward where the person is standing right now. Intuitively, this person figures out where he needs to be. Intuitively, the other person figures out where he needs to be or she needs to be. And the person is there to score a goal. And that is a state of collective consciousness.
The flow.
The flow. Imba, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, sorry, Melissa.
I can't remember who writes about it, but there's a case study, and it's about the Rolling Stones, and it's exactly that in terms of their longevity and their ability to essentially be a team on the stage and off the stage, and how they're able to anticipate each other on the stage as to what the smallest movement of a hand means, etc. And in telling the story of that team, they talk about it was in those early days where they just spent so much time together, like Krista was talking about, practicing. And then as they evolved more as a team, not being together unless they needed to be a team, so that when they came together to do these big tours, that it was all in, but then that they had the opportunity to go away and be individuals again. I can't remember who wrote it. He did a number of different case studies as well. I think one about the Red Cross and various different others. But that was one of the key points about the need to be able to anticipate and the discipline that's required to be able to make those anticipations.
Beautiful.
Imba, we've cut you off a couple of times.
No. That's perfectly all right. One small observation on what Hemant said, and then I'll come back to what I was wanting to share. Hemant, in terms of the soccer team, it may look to us instinctive, right? But I'm telling you, they have spent hours and hours strategizing and practicing those strategizing. So they exactly know when the ball is with the center forward, who are the people who are going to be fed and what are the conditions under which, they could, do that. That's one. Secondly, Krista mentioned Navy SEAL, and you mentioned the military. There is a singular difference in the decisions taken under those circumstances and the decisions that are taken in organizations. And that single difference is, for the first, it is a life or death kind of a situation. And hence, they prepare for it. No one wants to die, right? So they prepare for it. So the kind of consequences of any slippages in that team is life or death, between life and death, which is not so in corporate. And that's why you see, I always am, a little skeptical when we want to bring these concepts into companies. Yes, you need to practice as a team. You need to, do it. But getting that kind of, life and death kind of, best practices, I do not know. I do not know any company, at least I'm not aware of, in the last 40 years I've been in HR, where you have a Navy SEAL kind of a team operating in an organization. I don't know that.
I think you're right. I do think we can gain insights though, and I think the big one that I would just suggest is, and it goes a little bit back to your example earlier when you were talking. If you take somebody from a GE performance-oriented environment and bring them into a Unilever environment, and I get lots of, I don't want to say a lot, but I get cases when leaders are brought in, senior leaders from other organizations, and they're plucked into different organizations than they grew up in, and they exert their leadership behaviors as the way they've been taught to lead in their previous culture. I'm thinking of one tech team where the leader came in, was a high-profile leader to kind of work with a really multi-billion-dollar line of business, and that way of operating completely didn't work well in the new culture. And to make things worse, it took 10 months for her and the full team to get together. And by that point, so much damage had been done, so much trust has been broken, that they pulled everybody together for 3 days to try to really kind of relaunch the team after 10 months. And I think, so the point I'm making is, I think if spending some time together, we don't need to do 10,000 hours together to form as a team, to get to know each other through storytelling, to start to develop some strategies together. That's kind of, I think, the lesson. And I think the way we set teams up and launch them is a critical time. The midpoints, once a team has covered some ground, is a really interesting moment when they're open to reflecting on their strategies and progress, and to course correcting and pivoting. And then it's the end of a cycle. So anyways, I think you're right, Inba. We can't just wholesale adopt these practices and apply them in corporate settings, but I think there are some principles that we can pull on.
And just to,
there is an interesting question by one of the attendees called Bridge. He says, what is our definition of team here? And he says he gets mixed up with work groups and teams. So can we help spend a couple of minutes on that, Krista?
Sure. Just before that, Maya and Hemant, I think you were guys going to jump in. Did you want to jump in on that, and then we can go to Inba's question then? Yeah.
I think Maya, go ahead.
Maya, let's go Maya and then Hemant. Yeah.
So much to say.
Exactly, but the topic is so big and important. I agree with both perspectives, of course. At the same time, I think spending time together and really quality time is particularly important for teams with diverse people, right? Because especially when we talk about different cultures, different way of being, different ways of showing up, if we don't take that time, right? It's easy when we are similar with me. Of course, it's easy. We get along, the dynamics is there, we get excited by the same things, we get upset by the same things. But then when we have people that are different than us, well, we really need to have something in place. We need to have those mechanisms to get better, because there's so much beauty when actually very different people get together and work together. These are my 2 cents on the previous topic.
Lovely.
Very well.
Yeah, Hemant.
I think I'm just looking at the time, and I did want to kind of add to what you were saying, but I think that we'll have to leave for another day on the whole piece of applying the whole military piece here and so forth. So I'll let it be for now, and we can kind of move on with the questions and the rest of the topics. And that's, I think we should do.
I think we probably have some time to come back to that, but just let's go over to Bridget's question around, getting mixed up between work groups and teams. And I do think we can sometimes get lost in making that too black and white or either or. I think of it as a continuum, right? That even if a leadership team, for example, mainly comes together just to share information and they don't do much more than that, it is a kind of team. It's just it's more of a group than a team on that continuum. It's really about what is it that the team needs to do together that it can't do just working separately. Working groups tend to be easier for people to just work as individuals, and there isn't a lot of interdependency.
Correct.
But when the work is complex, it's fast moving, it requires collaboration, decision-making, coordination. I think that's when we really start the ability of a team to collaborate, or a group of people to collaborate more, requires a level of teaming and teamwork that becomes essential, right? So, I shared in my example, in this $1 billion example, where it took 10 months to really get the team formed properly. They were operating as a group, more of a working group as individuals, because they didn't have a common purpose, psychological safety, clear priorities, agreed upon ways of working. And so they needed to be that level of interdependent team to pull off the business, mission that they were charged with. And so in that case, not being a team was a major liability. And that's kind of my answer to this. Anybody else have anything to add there? Or?
The one thing that I would like to add is one of the significant differences between work groups and teams is teams are more interlinked and interdependent. Like you rightly said, work groups can still individually, they can function and get the work done that is needed by the group. But if you want, as you said, much more complexity and ambiguity coming in, you need to move the work group to a team. Secondly is, in my experience at least, I've seen work groups being, I may not call led, but kind of, there is one person who kind of, plays the conductor of the orchestra kind of a thing. So everyone is kind of, that person is having a view with everyone. Whereas in a team, because of the interconnectedness and in the interdependence, everyone is aware of what's happening with the other and what the other is delivering to them. So that's two aspects that I have seen to be different when I want to differentiate between a work group and a team. And I like your observation that it is more a continuum, with the work group being, in the early part of the thing. And if you really want something done, you need to have a team structure. You need to have a, team charter, if I may call, and members of the team being held accountable to those charters and ways of doing things.
Yeah. Great. I do think we have some time, Hemant, if you want to go back to the military, the military transfer debate.
No, I think we've said enough about that. And the thought that crossed my mind when Inba was speaking was the word strategy did not come from the boardroom.
I agree.
It actually came from somewhere else, and now going backwards from there. So there is, and that's my own point of view. Obviously, we can talk more about that and all. But I hear you. I think when you talk about the fact that you can't replicate it, but at the same point of time, there are elements that we can bring up. There is similar examples even in corporate, Hemant. For example, let us say, if someone talks about, of course, it's an old concept. If someone talks about Six Sigma, which is the company that comes to your mind? It is GE. But GE is not the one that came up with Six Sigma. It was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Motorola. And Jack Welch went and spent one day with the Motorola CEO understanding about Six Sigma. But when he came back,
he came back and did something to Six Sigma that caught the whole world's attention. And that is what I mean to say. You cannot replicate something from another organization into yours without having the right set of other things supporting that kind of an initiative.
It's a very interesting point. In fact, we were talking about competency models a short while ago. So we are currently working with an organization, and we thought we made a very good framework and sent it to the chairman of the company. And we've had multiple interviews by the time this process has happened with him and the rest of the CXO team. And he came back and we were having this conversation in her room. And she came back and she said, there is something missing. There is a hole somewhere. Great. So let's talk. Where do you see the hole? And after spending almost half an hour, 45 minutes, she came back and said, you know what? One of my challenges that I'm facing is, as a team, we're not inclusive enough. And that is not the diversity, inclusion, inclusive, but we don't seek enough points of view from each other. We don't debate enough. We don't talk enough. And I want to see this competency really developed in my senior leadership team. And obviously, we changed a few things and brought some behaviors in because we're going to be running an assessment on some of those aspects. But that to me was powerful, a leader's vision to be able to figure out what is required in the context of my organization at this point of time, and then go ahead and do it. So that's one thought that crossed my mind as I spoke about competency models and what is needed to build teams.
Lovely.
Do you have a sense, and this is an open question to any of you, as you're doing work with, leadership teams and senior teams, what are the most important things that need to be developed as a team capacity, right? So to kind of serve the organizations that we find ourselves working in today. I think it speaks a little bit to what you were saying earlier, Hemant, about the disruption, the need to be able to move agilely, and how you were taking some of the learnings from Crystal.
Yeah. True. Thanks, Melissa.
We see this need for, accelerated transformation, and it gets more and more intense. And it's, that growth mindset of celebrating the past and cherish that, and then embracing the future and doing that with what is needed. And at the same time, I think it's, again, the building trust is like, it continues to be, especially when things move so fast, right? When you get caught up in doing, you just need to reflect, take a step back, and really take a look at what's going on. So these are two areas where we do a lot of work recently on.
Lovely.
Incredible. I just realized we're almost at the top of the hour, and
I know
we're just about getting warmed up. So Melissa was talking about Rolling Stones a short while ago, and what's ringing in my head is I can get no satisfaction. And
I know.
This is amazing. So terrific. Thank you, Krista. Yeah. Please.
Well, we definitely can have you guys back for a part 2. It does seem to be the case where it does take us, 30 minutes, 40 minutes to get really juicy and rolling. But it's been great having you guys on. I want to, give each of you a chance to make a, parting comment. These conversations are organic. We don't plan them in advance. And I love the just the different, threads of where we went in today's conversation. And like you're saying, Hemant, we could just keep probably going for a couple of hours. But I think that's the idea of getting amongst peers and sharing thinking on topics. And I'm sure we've just scratched the surface of the kinds of work you guys do. But would love to give each of you a chance to, make a closing comment, anything else you want to add from today to be complete, at least for the time being, for today's session. So maybe I'll go starting with you, Maya. Anything you would like to say in kind of closing today, or final comment, parting advice, words of wisdom, anything else to add here that we didn't get to talk about that you'd like to plant a seed for a future conversation, or what comes to mind?
Actually, a book comes to mind that I recently started reading, so it's in line with our conversation. It's about scaling up. I don't have the name of the author. It's Claire, but she was at Google, and then she went to Stripe, and she did a lot of fantastic work there. And
it's called Scaling Up.
Yes, Scaling Up.
Okay.
I really got impressed by how simple is the way she talks about leading people and doing this, humanly, but also having the business orientation. And what are the simple practices that each of us can embrace, especially as leaders? So that would be my closing remark.
Lovely. Thank you for that resource. It's great to check that out. Inba, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, Hemant, for, kind of introducing me to Krista and Melissa and Maya. It's been wonderful knowing you all, and hope to, have more such conversation. I think for me, the biggest takeaway from this is, it has already seeded so many thoughts into my head, which each one of them can be a discovery by itself, and getting into more and more deeper realms of being able to work effectively with people and help them realize the potential that is inherent in every one of them. I think that's been a big takeaway. Great knowing, being able to work with you all, and definitely look forward to some more interesting conversations around these areas. Thank you, Krista.
Yeah, lovely. Hemant.
Krista, I'm reminded of what I shared with you almost 3-4 years ago when we spoke for the first time as to why I'm so interested in team coaching, and I can still say that with as much passion that I did then, that while I believe in individual development of people, coaching, one-on-one, and so forth, I also am beginning to believe that the time of one person showing the light is also gradually fading off, and the ability of groups and teams to come together to get things done in this complexity is at an all-time high. And if we are able to crack that, we can go places. So that's what inspires me to work with teams and groups and team coaching every day. So thank you for this opportunity, Krista, Melissa, and thank you, Maya and Inba, for accepting the invitation and being here. It's a privilege being here with you all. Yeah, thank you.
It's lovely having you, Hemant. Melissa, closing comment from you, and I've popped up your website here for the listeners to check you guys out.
Thank you,
Hemant.
Krista. Thank you.
Closing comment for me, rich and varied conversation, but the thing that really stood out for me that Maya reminded me of, which is a lovely gift to give to me and to give to our listeners on a Friday afternoon, is just remembering to see the beauty in the work that we do and the beauty in the people that we're working with. So thank you for that lovely reminder.
Yeah. And my closing comment, I'll pick up something you said, Inba, that, so much of your work with organizations is trying to help them counterbalance the performance orientation with really understanding that you get there through the enablement of people and partnering with people and, empowering people. So I think that's one of the topics that's really sticking with me. And, that's the privilege of this work, and also the challenge, right, is getting the attention to put that investment there. It doesn't need to be a massive investment, but whatever investment can be done around enabling the teams just pays big dividends. So yeah, I think it's time and investment well spent, as hopefully is today of this episode for our listeners. And we will be putting this out on all the, the podcast platforms, but it's always available on YouTube and LinkedIn, this live stream. So Tattva Consulting, Hemant, Maya, and Inba, great having you guys on. You have a standing invitation to come back anytime. If there's a specific topic or two you want to come back to continue, we can do a part 2 or just another new conversation anytime. So we'll keep that invitation out there for you. We'd love to have you back.
Thanks, Krista.
Thank you,
everyone.
Krista.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Take
Bye.
Have a great weekend,
Go well.
everybody. Take care. Bye now.